Coogs' house. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't maybe the most fun it could have been, but Houston put out an impressive defensive effort against Troy, one that broke records.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars Daily Podcast, all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater against something, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate making your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you want to join the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us in the comments down below where you watched the Houston and Troy game from, if you watched it. If not, tell us why not. All right, full disclosure, I want to do this live post-game. But the game I was coaching in wrapped up. I was getting back to the coach's office on my phone around halftime and very quickly saw the score and was like, people already tuned out of that game. And so I want to talk about Houston and Troy. In this one, Houston beats Troy 62-42. I want to kind of recap and react as if it's a post game, a little bit, be a little bit shorter feel as well. It's kind of the nature of the beast with this one. But I want to start with the positive and the defensive side of the basketball. Defense of the floor, I should say. And then the second half of the show, I want to talk something about the offense and offensive struggles. And I'm talking about the basketball team, not the football team. All right, so in this game, Houston again wins 62-42 over Troy. And I don't know that that completely outlines the full defensive effort. Houston allowed just 12 field goals made from Troy. They also forced 12 turnovers by Troy. It took over 4 minutes for Troy to get their first basket. And even that basket was like a tough putback after a long three, kind of an awkward rebound. Troy is usually a 7-21 from the three. If you're looking at all their averages, kind of teams, roughly a 33%. Houston held them to 2 of 18 from behind the arc. Troy usually shoots 48% from the field. Houston held them to 24% on Tuesday, December 10th. And for what it's worth, Houston also forced, I believe it was 4 shot clock violations on the game. They held Miles Rigsby, the top scorer on the team, averaging over 14 points per game, scoreless for nearly the first 34 minutes. Didn't score until after the 33-minute into the game mark. He finished with just a whopping 3 points. He didn't even get that many shots. I've got 6 field goals up. Houston was really relentless in attacking and making sure he did not get to his spots. There was a long time between baskets, a bunch of different times in this game. Long time between baskets, a bunch of different times. And yeah, that made sense. And I feel like a lot of people are just chalking this up to more about Troy. And I have too much data that says that's not it. Troy was up on Arkansas at halftime. Calipari and all the transfer portal kind of guys that Arkansas brought in, all the Tyson chicken money and all that, didn't matter, right? Troy was up on them at halftime. Only lost that game by 16. Houston beat them by 20 in an ugly offensive game, right? Houston was up big time. The history of this game, the history record-setting moment of this game is that Houston allowed just 11 points in the first half. Just 11. That is good for the lowest point total Houston's allowed in a half ever. The previous low was 12. I think that's in the shot clock era, if I'm reading stats correctly. But that's pretty darn impressive. The 42 points overall in the game were the season low by the Troy Trojans by 7 points. They had 49 points in the finale, and by the end of the game against Arkansas, got another muddied game by them, and it's 19 points lower than the next lowest game when they had 61 against Oregon. On the whole, Troy's offensive numbers in this one just jump off the page, stick out compared to the rest of their game logs. And that's because Houston's stifling defense forced them into tough spots. Now, Troy is a team that already like to spend a lot of the shot clock, maybe not as much of it as Houston does typically, but like to use a lot of the shot clock, kind of get late shot clock actions and kind of minimize the possessions in a basketball game, keeps things even. And unfortunately for Troy, Houston loves that, right? That's right up Houston's alley. Houston's actually better at those kinds of things than Troy is, right? The exact same kinds of things. Now, what you saw there is a bunch of great defensive possessions that ended in bad shots, not necessarily in turnovers or block shots or whatever. In this game, Houston did only out rebound Troy by 2. But Houston also went through stretches where it felt like they hit several shots in a row. I think kind of limited that number. Troy had 17 offensive rebounds, which was a lot. But I would stress that some of those offensive rebounds came off of a like Houston is understands the shot clock is expired kind of thing, and I guess technically the offensive rebound comes with less than a tenth of a second on the shot clock, and the buzzer goes off. That's a couple. That's 2 of them at least. And you also had different moments where the offensive rebound bounces because they chuck it from so far away and it bounces in the other side of the floor and stuff like that. And so it ends up being an offensive rebound. Lots of stuff to improve on, obviously, defensively. 11 points in the first half. Spoiler alert, that means they had 31 in the second half. Houston actually lost the second half. We'll talk more about Houston's offense in a second. But that 31-29, it wasn't like a dramatic, but anyway. And really, I think that's kind of more about taking your foot off the gas. Defense feeds on energy. The energy in the stadium was incredibly low for Tita. Well, it's usually pretty rowdy. Obviously, it is midweek. I believe someone on Twitter said it's finals week. And it's a weekday game against a not great opponent. All that is to say that some of the energy lulls probably could have been predicted. It doesn't mean you wanted to see them. You got a couple get right games in December and want to kind of use this to your advantage to do so. But ultimately, you kept Butler completely out of the one that they wanted to do. I mentioned in the preview of this game that Tatum Conaway, the point guard for them, he's usually a 10-5-5 kind of guy. He had 9 points, did get his 8 rebounds, but just 1 assist. Houston was able to really limit what was available to him once he drove to the lane. Marcus Rigsby, I mentioned, was a sharpshooter for them. His brother Miles is their leading scorer, but Marcus is like a 48% three-point shooter or something crazy. He was 1 of 4, and I was frankly surprised in checking the box score afterwards that he even got 4 off. I didn't remember him getting 4 threes off in that basketball game. That's, I think speaks to the level of difficulty some of those shots were on the whole. He made 1 of 2 3-pointers for Troy. And honestly, they kind of fall into that a lot more. They shot 18 in this game. Great defense there by Houston. And I think a lot of that is honestly winning matchups. Troy's not a team that outsized Houston by a whole heck of a lot. Had some guys come off the bench that had a lot of size to them, but starter to starter, Houston was fine. Sedlock got to play some at the very end of the game. But other than that, your big men were Tugler and Francis and a little bit of Roberts with a smaller lineup. And that proved to be plenty big to be competitive and large inside. Where things really hurt Houston, and they still scored 62 points and still won the game. They're still top 15 in the country. They're still 6-3 and 5-0 at home. I don't mean to say the sky is falling, but the offense continues to have problems, even though they had one player outscore the other team in the first half. I'll talk more about that in a second. But first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's right, FanDuel is the best place to get in on the action every Sunday, every week, I guess, because NFL happens on more than just Sundays right now. New customers can bet $5, get $150 back in bonus bets if your bet hits. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. You get a hunch in the middle of a game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more all in the same place where you place your bets. If it's FanDuel.com, get $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Parker Ainsworth locked on Coogs here, looking at offensive struggles for Houston in this Troy basketball game. I think it's easy to think about how great that deep was. Again, setting a record for the school for lowest points allowed by halftime or in a half, I guess, in general. And at halftime, LJ Cryer had 16 points, and Troy, the university, not a person, had 11. um, obviously, that is a dominant effort from the Houston Cougars. Obviously, that means things are going well. Obviously, there was little doubt, if at all, that Houston was not going to win this basketball game. But I thought, okay, so I'll stick with the positives because there is one positive I think we're seeing out of LJ Cryer in this game, and it kind of become his thing if you go a little bit further back as well. Is they're finding spots on the floor where LJ is clearly comfortable being more ball dominant. What I mean there is that like between the lane lines, extended past the 3-point line, the top of the arc, the dead center of the floor, right? LJ Cryer has been very comfortable getting the ball there on dribble handoffs, spot ups, spotting up there for offensive rebound, kickouts, etc. But spotting up there between those lane lines to kind of create his own individual offense, right? Everyone kind of has their spots that they get to on the floor and attack from wherever, right? I think LJ's kind of found that that's his best spot to do that from. He did like what was I going to say? He kind of starts up there on handoffs or on kickouts or whatever, and if the defense overreacts to his ability as a jump shooter, he can attack off the bounce. Maybe get in the lane, get a little floater. Got a very direct path to a straight line to the basket from that area, and so I think he likes that a lot. He seems to be very comfortable up there. He had 16 of his 22 in the first half. Yes, that means he only had the 6 in the second half, but things had kind of been decided well before that point. Obviously, big scoring month or so now for Cryer. I think that's 4 games in a row. He's up over 20. Um, impressive score, all Big 12 caliber score. We know that much. I think the best offensive player on this team, though, is LJ Cryer. That I just talked about. I think the best offensive player on this team is Terrance Arsenault. He did play just 22 minutes. It was a blowout. I kind of thought we might get to see him a little bit longer as we're trying to kind of push things. I mentioned that in the pregame show that I wondered if it was kind of time to see if it go more like 25, 27, 28 minutes and kind of see what his body reacted like the next day. He had 9 points, had 4 rebounds, had an assist. He really, though, the way he moves, his shifting of gears, his ability to get to the short corner off the bounce, his finding space as other guys drive, all feels mature beyond his years. He's I guess, technically a medically redshirted sophomore, third year at the university, obviously. Missed last year with the Achilles tear and did get the medical redshirt for that. So that is to say, he has a couple more years of eligibility if he wants it. He just moves different, and I think that my biggest thing for thinking of him as the biggest offensive threat for Houston when he can play, because again, hadn't really broken that 22, 23 minute threshold yet, and coming back from his Achilles tear, is that every matchup he gets, he's got an advantage. You put someone shifty that can stick with him in space, he's going to be taller and longer. You put someone taller and longer on him, he can go by those guys in space. He's just a difficult guy as a scorer, as a defense bender to match up with. Milos is big and strong at 6'3", right, and long arms, but he hasn't seemed to put his defenders in the blender the same kind of way that Terrence can. Emmanuel is not super tall for a small forward, third guard kind of guy. LJ Cryer is not super tall for that. Frankly, the posts aren't either. Terrance Arsenault's got that advantage where he can go by 4s. No one's going to land with a 5 on him, but he could go by them as well. And he has the muscle, the length, the back down guy kind of game to get into other smaller guards. He's a troublesome matchup for other teams. And it just feels like this thing that whenever Houston can finally really use him to his full extent this season, their offense is going to get a lot better. I think that that's a big part of this. As far as between now and then, because we don't know when that's going to happen, this team is still trying to find out what works on offense for this team. What are they going to be known for? Outside of Terrence, this team has trouble getting to the lane off the bounce. By that, I mean that they have trouble. Like, if we just go 4 out, 1 in dribble drive, I don't know how many guys on this team could get to the hip of a defender and get in the paint. That they've all played off the ball, with the exception of Milos, for a lot of their college careers. They've been playing with, Jamal Shedd. If you've been at Houston, I guess Cryer would have been next to, what was it, Baylor's kid's name? It was like Flaglander or something, Flagler. and all those guys at Baylor before he came to Houston. Milo's actually played off of a fairly ball-dominant two-guard last year. And you're seeing guys that I think would have trouble, again, beating most defenders, or not beating most, but beating really good defenders off the bounce and getting in the lane. And a lot of, for better or worse, but I would argue better, a lot of Sampson's pro offense kind of things he's taken out of his time in the NBA, all is predicated on having one guy that makes the defense change their rules. Last year it was Shed. The year before it was honestly Shed and Sasser. That's why the team was so good, right? You had some years where it was a Ladiki. You had some years, frankly, where it's Tremont. You had guys that can kind of shift the defense because they're not going to have a guy. They're going to have ways to beat the single man in front of them, and so the defense has to find some way to bring over help, and then you can exploit the help, or send a double or something, and they can exploit that, right? And Houston's finding that that's not the strong suit thus far. Again, I think Terrance can, but we don't know when he's going to be able to play 32 minutes, right? So it's hard to rely on that. And you also saw in this game one counter to, even if you could do that, was if you have trouble beating a guy off the bounce, you have a lot of trouble finding the gaps in the zone. In the second half, where Houston scored just 29 points, I say just 29 points. They did lose second half 31-29. But anyway, Troy was able to run different defenses, 1-3-1 here, or 3-2-12 kind of look there, or mixed up man and zone, not necessarily from possession to possession, but frequently throughout the second half. And if you have trouble beating your man one-on-one, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting into the gap, right, against the zone, because there's potentially two hands getting there. There's potentially two sets of feet getting to your spot. There's potentially two chests you got to make sure you don't run through an offensive foul kind of a way, and all of that. I do think against the zone, again, the offense just needs to move better with Terrance on it. He can attack, he can shoot, and defenses know that and react to that. I will say, so I like Malik Wilson. He is a very nice kid, nice guy. He's an adult at this point. And I think he's getting kind of a raw deal because he's being asked to play backup point guard, and he might just not be a backup point guard, even though he's a very good basketball player. But what I will say is that, in a game last weekend where you saw Kelvin say in the postgame that, playing time and minutes were determined by effort esteem of the coaches and this, that, and the other thing, and you then look over and the Malik has barely played. I think Malik kind of we all felt on Sunday and Monday like Malik was in the doghouse. And it's not that he played a lot of minutes in this game. He played 14, which I think is the third highest bench minutes, right? But I do think that, Troy had a lot of trouble with a lot of things Houston did. The offense felt like it had at least a straight line gear, like pushing in transition and stuff like that, with Malik on the floor. Malik might be the most fast, twitchy athlete on the team, so that tracks. But like getting the outlet and going and getting off the floor, I think that they kind of hit another gear with Malik. I also think, for what it's worth, and we talked about depth before, and this is probably where I leave this as far as getting right in this game. Malik came as backup point guard, and you had 9 players in double-digit minutes in this game. Now, you're not going to hold teams to 11.5 every week and every game. And I don't mean to make every opponent Houston will play out to be Troy. Once they start conference play on December 30th, there won't be any more Troys, right? However, I do think that part of the reason that Malik's units looked so much faster on the floor, whether you like Malik or not, again, I like the guy a lot, and I think that he has valuable minutes to contribute to this team. But whether you like that or not, whether you agree with me or not, Malik and his group did get to see a Troy team that did not have the same kind of depth, right? Now, they did have a lot more guys play 20 total minutes, or play 10 or more minutes, I should say. But those guys were gassed out. They were sucking wind. And Malik in the second unit kind of got to take advantage of that because they've been exhausted out by the first Houston Cougar lineup. And so grain of salt there, obviously, but I do think Malik's speed adds an element to this game where even if he's not the starting or backup point guard, I don't think he'd ever be the starter. But people don't want to be the backup point either. I feel like, that speed and energy could be a useful tool in this game. Now, Sampson, for what it's worth, was visibly frustrated with the offense in this game. He spoke about it a little bit as well afterwards. A lot of the conversation afterwards was actually about Tillman Fertitta, which is something we may get into this week. We'll see. That was kind of an awkward tweet to see overnight, but I feel confident that this team will get better on offense. I think what's going to be hard to swallow is this team is not going to be as good as the last 3-ish years of Cougar basketball were on offense. And I don't know it's going to be as good as next year will be on offense either. It doesn't mean they can't win. Defensive teams win championships, and defensive first teams can win championships. And I don't mean to say they can't win. That's not what I'm saying. I was saying that it's starting to feel more like some of these might be too big of a daunting task to fix if you're trying to be the same kind of offense you were last year or the year before. Certainly not the year before. The year before's offense with Marcus and Jamal Tremont, that team was good. So we'll be following this along. Houston's next basketball matchup will be, I believe it's Toledo on Wednesday, a week from when this comes out on Wednesday. So Houston's got time to get ready, time to get healthy, maybe time to see if Terrance Arsenault can play more than 22 minutes. We have all kinds of fun stuff to talk about this week, though, without basketball games going on. Transfer portal, defensive coordinator coaching search, which I thought was going to be slowed down some today, but we'll see more in the next few days. Potential big portal ads, though. I think I just said portal ads, but potentially a gigantic portal ad on the football team. So make sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell so you know we're live. Locked On Coogs, primarily Locked On podcast. Now we're your team every day. Go Coogs.